At what point does the thing that built your business start to become the thing holding it back?
Welcome back to the Growth Minded Marketing Podcast. I'm Steve Phipps, joined by AnnieLaurie Walters, and today we're talking to someone that the Wayfind team knows very well, Chris Riggins. Now, Chris has been a client of ours for a long time, and we've had a pretty close view of a lot of what he's going to talk about today.
Which honestly made listening to this interview kind of interesting because hearing Chris tell the whole story in one sitting, I kept coming back to the same thought. Every time the business needed to grow, Chris had to grow first.
And that's really what this conversation's about. On the surface, it's a story about a growing painting company, but underneath of it, it's the story of a business owner learning that what got him to one stage wasn't going to get him to the next. And Chris is incredibly honest and refreshingly so about that journey. Every growth stage has required something different from him as a leader. Different types of decisions, different skills, different perspectives. And more than once, it took someone from outside of the business to help him to see what he couldn't see on his own.
He has this phrase, what does Chris Riggins need to do to get out of Chris Riggins' way? And I like that. And I think that's kind of the whole episode right there. He started Riggins Painting in 2009. The housing market had just collapsed. The company he worked for shut down. And basically, he went from employee to business owner overnight. All he had was a set of hand tools and an old truck with over 200,000 miles on it. But now he's grown the business into a 9-person management team and at least tripled his revenue since 2022.
And as impressive as that is, it's the how of that growth, the mindset shifts, the moments where he had to let go of control, the decision to bring in outside coaches and partners. That's what makes this conversation resonate with CEOs. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Chris Riggins. All right, friends. So welcome back to another episode of the Growth Minded Marketing Podcast. And if you're a first-time listener, one of the things that we do here is I have conversations with business owners and CEOs, usually of service-based businesses, and they get a chance to share their story. So these are folks that are in the trenches and they've learned a lot. These are folks that have grown companies or still building their companies. And this is an opportunity for them to share their stories, the lessons that they've learned, the challenges that they've faced, the hard wisdom gained through the challenges of owning a business. And so I'm excited about today's guest. Today, Chris Riggins from Riggins Painting is joining us. And I've known Chris for a number of years. Our first conversation was at a Panera Bread. We were introduced by a mutual friend. And the initial conversation was, hey, Chris has a painting company and they might need some help with marketing. And so I've had the opportunity to work with Chris and his team, being a marketing partner with them for a number of years now. And so not only is Chris a great business owner and operator, but he's just a good guy. I consider him a friend, and he's somebody fun to banter with, but he's got a fantastic story. So Chris, thank you for joining us today. I'm glad you're on the podcast.
Man, it's an honor to be here. And likewise, I appreciate our friendship over the years, and looking forward to many more to come.
Now, Chris, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, your company, and how you even got the business started?
Yeah, man. So I grew up in kind of what I would call a blue collar family. My dad was a mechanic and painted on the side with his dad. My great granddad was a painter. My great uncle owned a painting company. I was told that my great granddad was actually colorblind, but he could make the best candy apple red color you could imagine back when they would mix the tint in their vans, right? To
wow.
get more close to what the customer wanted. So, it's not something I obviously set out to do. I didn't know that about my family until I kind of got into it, honestly.
Okay. So you didn't have aspirations from childhood to have a painting business?
Absolutely not. No, I got married young, man, had kids young, responsibility started. There was a church group that I was a part of that had several businesses, and painting was one of them. So in the summer, I would go and work in this company. I learned how to paint. When I graduated high school, I was a foreman, project manager, and a sales guy for that particular company. So learned kind of the ins and outs of the business, but also learned about how to paint. Like if you're going to start a painting company, it's good to know how to paint. So that's how I started in the trade. Well, in 08, 09, when the housing market crashed, the company I was working in prior to, they shut down.
Yep.
And we were doing a lot of high end new construction at the time. And so I picked it up and I just grabbed the logo that we used to have and put my last name on it, Riggins Painting. The idea originally was like, let me survive for a couple of years and then see where it goes from here. I had 3 of my 5 kids at the time. It was a very tough 2 years, 9, 2010. It's kind of at the end of '09 when I started, so 2010 and even into 2011, it was pretty brutal getting things off the ground, but man, I knew a lot about the painting world as far as, like, how to put the paint on the walls and the technical side of it. Also, a little bit about management and a little bit about sales. 0 about marketing and 0 about administrating a business. So there was a lot of, like, school of hard knocks that I had to run through on that side. The owner of the original business was gracious enough to give me a 220,000-mile Ram truck with my hand tools, so that's kinda where I started, man, just, like, at the base there with, just my truck and tools.
Yeah. So no aspirations for growing a company at that point. Like you said, it was more survival.
Yep.
The company folded and you've got a skill set. Now you've got tools. Now you've got a truck. So those first 2 years, as you said, were pretty brutal. What were some of the lessons that you learned through those first couple of years?
I learned how hard it is to start a business from the ground up. Sure. I mean, that's not really understanding, having really any contacts. I had some customers that knew me that I had worked with in the past. So there was at least a small starting place. I think one of the lessons that I learned there was how important it was to manage time well. There's a lot of hats that you're spinning, especially when you're starting a business. You're the chief cook and bottle washer, as I like to say.
Yeah.
There is no one else. It's you. The buck stops with you. And if I had to do it over again, I don't know that I could have done it any differently because there wasn't an option. There wasn't an opportunity. I didn't have, a stash of cash. I wasn't saved and ready to start a business. I couldn't even get a loan for that matter. I was in my 20s. So, yeah, there was a lot going against me, but man, by God's grace, we were able to kind of pull through it.
So one of the things I think is important to note here, something you said that really struck a chord is not everybody's equipped to start a business from the ground up. And because that is a unique skill set. And what I've seen happen, and it's a common story for entrepreneurs, is somebody is able to start the business. They get through the first few years, which, as you said, can be brutal. Just the challenges, especially when you've got a family, you've got kids. And so just the weight of all of that's riding on your shoulders. The challenge that I know some business owners and CEOs run into is they get to a point where things have to shift and change if they're going to continue growing the business beyond just themselves and maybe one or two other people. And so walk me through, if you will, when did you get to a point where you realized that you had to do something different if you were going to keep growing the business? And what did that look like?
Yeah, man, great question. I think for me, there were multiple transition phases through the journey. Obviously, the first transition phase of being an employee versus a business owner, or do you own the business or does it own you? Right. And that's like the first few years of struggle of not allowing the beast to swallow you whole. So that just takes some grit, stamina, and persistence. Right. But to your point, once you get to an area where you're like, okay, I've gone as far as I can personally go, how do you move to the next level? And I think for each transition phase, you need a healthy dose of self awareness.
Mm.
Like, what I end up always finding is it's super easy to blame your surroundings. It's super easy to blame other people, your circumstances. It's super hard to have a good hard look in the mirror and say, what is it that Chris Riggins needs to do to get out of Chris Riggins' way? And I would say that each transition required that type of honesty with myself, but also seeking out that type of input into my life or into my business. I had a lot of mentors along the way, man, both spiritual and just business oriented. And I think that was a huge deal. But I would say the first transition for me was from employee to business, like starting a business, and then from starting and running the business to How do I become an owner slash operator where I'm not always operating, but I'm owning operating?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I needed to hire people. And, thankfully I had some friends that worked with me in the past that came in and helped me do some of the actual hands-on painting work so that I could focus more on sales and project management and admin. And I saw that as like, wow, okay, this really makes sense. But I think there's a lot of sometimes owners get, at least for me in the blue collar world, not having much business experience. There's this little piece of pride. No one can do it like I do it. If I'm not on the job site, it won't go the way I want it to. If I don't complete this particular task, it won't get done the right way. I've tried hiring people and they screw it up. And so therefore it's just easier, quote, easier for me to do it myself.
So what did you help? Because I think you're right. And that's a common thing for founders. Because, the initial phases of the business, you're the one who's executing. So you're doing things the way that you feel they should be. And so there's a high degree of control. I think that's difficult for a lot of folks to get past that. So what helped you make that jump, make that, to be able to step back enough to go, okay, I recognize this isn't going to get done exactly the way that I would do it, but I'm going to let go of that.
Yeah, man. I think when I was actually in the painting world, I had a guy running a job one time and he just did it completely the opposite way than I would do it. He started at a place I wouldn't start. And the midway point was nowhere where my midway point was. There's so many things different and quote wrong about the way he was doing it. The finished product was no different and the timeline much the same. And so that was kind of a key in for me to be like, I think it's just a humility thing, right? Like you got to swallow your pride a little bit. And actually, when I did that and I began to step out in faith, I saw that people were actually better, way better at certain aspects of my business than I was. And once I began to find those kinds of people and recognize that, it made the letting go a lot easier because then I knew that it was in good hands.
So there's a couple of things here that I want to point out. As leaders, as CEOs, as business owners, it's important for us to help define what the end result looks like. But where we can get hung up is when we feel like we need to dictate the how. Now, there are clearly times where the how needs to be done a certain way. Absolutely.
Sure.
But there are a lot of situations where, as you said, he started someplace different. His midpoint looked different, but the end result, it was a good end result and it got done within the needed time frame. And so I think there are some of those points, as you said, it comes back to, am I just being prideful here? Is this me trying to control something that I don't need to? And then two, as you said, you had people that you could trust. And it's funny because starting a business is risky, but sometimes I think it feels riskier to hand that over to somebody else and letting them have some control.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the key points for me, so we got to about 750,000 in sales when I was still running kind of all the ins and outs of everything. So hiring my first in-house manager was a project manager, and then trying to organize, how do I pay this guy? What does payroll look like? What's a W-2 versus 1099? At this point, it's just been my guys that are helping me are 1099s. So they're super easy in terms of hey, help me with this job. I'll pay you X number of dollars and we move on. But hiring a management team was a completely different animal that I had never, I'd never done before. So I started going to expos. That was super helpful for me. Go and meet people who are in the same industry as you in a different state. They're actually very helpful to people who are getting started. I attribute a lot of my success to that as well, because I was able to break away. I made the time to break away to go to some of these expos, right? So some people are like, well, I can't afford the time to do it. My argument would be you can't afford not to do it, because what ends up happening is 30 years goes by and you're in the same place you were and nothing ever changes because you don't break out of the box and lose some of the head trash, right? You need another business owner to look you in the face and say, what you just said is head trash. Stop saying that. Go do this.
It's so important to have those people who are willing to be that kind of person who can do exactly what you just said. Hey, look, I understand why you're thinking that, but it's not going to work out.
That's right.
And I think that goes along with the idea of humility. It's not just a willingness to ask for that type of input and feedback, but it's then the willingness to do something with it.
Yep. I think asking for it, and then absolutely it has to be actionable. Right. We can't stay in idea mode. If it stays in idea mode, then you're no better than you were when you began.
It's the old adage of what got you here isn't going to get you there.
That's right.
And so speaking of there, I want to fast forward because you've had some pretty big transitions over the last 2 years. And so the business looks a lot different now than it did back, you know, a few years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So why don't you walk us through what have been some of the recent changes and transitions that you've walked through? What are some of the lessons learned?
Yeah, man. So we grew the business. We hired, some guys to help me run the day-to-day operations in the office. I actually moved 4 hours away from my business 6 years ago in 2020.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, October of 2020, we
Man,
moved.
seems like it's only been like 3 years.
Yeah,
That's wild.
yeah,
Okay.
we moved 4 hours from the business. Man, I was able to install a general manager that could do the day-to-day operations. I disengaged completely from the business and the day-to-day operations for at least 2 years. And I actually did some coaching on the side. The business was still profitable, still operating. And, honestly, I was actually pretty happy where I'd gotten the business. Like a lot of people looking on were saying things like, wow, you made it. You did it. You were able to build a business and reap the benefits of the profitability of the business and not have to be there day to day. That's pretty awesome, blah, blah. And it was. I don't downplay that. But what happened is all the talent and people that have brought me to that level wanted more and needed more for their families. And so that re-engaged me back to say, hey, let's keep going. And that's what we did. So we met a group of folks that were really good at scaling painting companies. We partnered with them. We brought them in on a level that most may not be comfortable doing because, again, it was another step in that direction for me to be like, okay, I can just sit here for the next 15 years and be just fine with what I'm getting. But what I want is more for my people. And also realizing if I don't, I'm going to lose it, right? If I don't continue to scale and grow, I'm going to lose the talent and people that I've brought to the table at this point. Yeah. Partnering with these folks, man. And we've pretty much, I guess, at least tripled in our gross sales over the last, since 2022. And yeah, we're up to nine in-house managers, like 3 project managers, 3 salespeople, a project coordinator, an office manager, a general manager, a marketing coordinator. Those are all in-house employees of our painting company, and none of them paint. Okay. They all just manage.
They're helping provide the infrastructure and the support.
Right. That's right.
So the thing I appreciate about your story, there are several things here that stand out to me. One is the humility that you've had to recognize that there are things that you need to shift and change in order for the business to continue to grow and scale. And you've been willing to ask for that help and you've been willing to do the work. I think it's also, and again, because I've known you and so I know your character, but it's your heart for other people. As you said, by a lot of standards, you had sort of arrived. Here you are, you've built a business and you're enjoying the fruit of that. I mean, you put in time, effort, and energy. And so now you're experiencing the fruit of that. But your willingness to step back in, one, I don't hear any begrudging, you didn't do it begrudgingly, but you were willing to step back in because, as you said, you wanted better for your team and you recognize that there's they want to continue growing. And so you can either support that or you can lock down and try to protect what you have. But as you said, you're probably going to lose them in that, which is going to put you back into business anyway. So I appreciate just your willingness to do that. And you've got a fantastic team. Brian, your general manager, always enjoy conversations with him. He always asks me good questions, I know I can't, not that I would, but I know I can't come in just with fluffy answers. You guys ask good questions because you're monitoring the health of the business and results of all the different efforts and activities. So as we start to wrap this up, Chris, you said 2009, plus you were painting prior to that. So you're coming into this with 17 years of ownership experience, going from being you to now a company that you said you've got 9 people on staff, plus your painters. So what's a lesson learned that you wish somebody had shared with you in the early days that you could share with our listeners?
I would say probably 2 things. One, you always hear people say, know your numbers. I always heard that in the business world, like know your numbers. And I never really knew what they were talking about, but now I do. Like knowing your numbers, meaning everything should be driven by metrics and the decisions that you make should be metric supported, right? Like profitability wise, your sales team, you should measure by metrics. Your project managers are measured by metrics and everybody knows your numbers, not just the owner. Right? The transparency needs to be there. And the second one that I think that would have been helpful for me is like, what can I do to collapse time? because time is our biggest commodity. Like money can be made and spent and will be for eternity, but we each only have a finite amount of time. Make the most of it. And if there's certain things within your business that you're withholding doing because you're afraid of XYZ, ask the question to yourself, am I collapsing time by making this decision? In other words, if I can hire a coach that can get me from A to B in 6 months, as opposed to me struggling for 2 years, is it worth the hire? The answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. It's kind of it's the old adage of penny wise and pound foolish. Sometimes it's worth making the investment because, as you said, it's going to accelerate what it is you're trying to do and gain and the efficiencies that can be gained. Yep. Well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Thank you for sharing the lessons learned. And so for folks who would like to find you, if you're in the Memphis and the surrounding area and you're interested in talking to somebody from Chris's team about coming out painting your house or your business, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So RigginsPainting.com is absolutely the best place. Steve knows that place well. He helped me build it and maintain it. But yeah, RigginsPainting.com, you can actually book online, book an estimate online. You don't even have to call in if you don't want to. And an estimator will come right out based on the time that works for you, and we'll get it taken care of. Or you can call 901-444-0944. That's our direct office number, and a lovely lady will pick up and get you scheduled.
Fantastic. Chris, thanks again for joining us. And for our listeners, one of the things that we always hope to help people achieve through these stories, as well as just through marketing, is clarity. And because when clarity is missing, it results in confusion, and that can really hinder growth. And so the tool that we have on our website that can help you get some clarity about where things are going well with your marketing and where things are off track and what you can do about it. If you go to wayfindmarketing.com, you'll see a link for our business assessment or our marketing assessment. It's free. It's 25 yes, no questions, takes about 5 minutes. It'll give you an immediate score and access to our marketing playbook. And so we've designed it to give you clarity and actionable items that you can begin implementing with your business. So Chris, thanks again. And thanks to our listeners for joining us.
It was a pleasure, Steve. Thanks.
Okay, Steve, let's debrief a bit. I want to start with something Chris said that I think deserves a little more airtime. He described every growth transition as requiring a new look in the mirror, asking himself, what does Chris Riggins need to do to get out of Chris Riggins' way? Steve, you're both a CEO and a founder. Did that resonate with you? And why is that sometimes really hard to do?
Yes, that definitely resonates, because for a business to grow beyond certain stages, the founder, the CEO, is the one who really has got to figure things out. And there's a lot of identity that gets wrapped up in starting a business. And we heard that with Chris's story, that he got through those first years, but as the business grew, it required a different version of him. And so you shift into moving away from being the hub of the business to needing to delegate, to giving others responsibility and then trusting them to go do it without micromanaging it. And so as a founder and a CEO, giving up that sense of control, it can feel like a threat. It feels scary. And that's the reason why a lot of businesses never grow beyond a certain limit, is because the owner, the founder, doesn't get through that threshold. And the skill set that gets you to one stage doesn't necessarily take you to the next. And so to step back and learn, reinvent, to invite feedback that might not be easy to hear is critical to that growth. And it's a step that a lot of CEOs never take.
Chris also talked about a specific moment where he watched one of his employees paint a room in completely the wrong order. For some reason, this just really resonated with me personally, but this employee started in the wrong place, hit the midpoint differently, but when he was done, it looked exactly the way it was supposed to. It was the same quality in the same time frame. And Chris called that a humility thing. Steve, what would you call it?
I would agree with that. And I would also say that it's a lot of self-awareness. Humility is the virtue, but self-awareness is the skill. And what he was able to execute in that moment was distinguishing his preferences, his way of doing things from the desired outcome. And that's honestly something that a lot of owners and CEOs have to go through. It's asking the question, is my way the only right way? Or is it just my preferred way? And it's having to look at what is the desired outcome and giving your team the freedom where it makes sense to do things in their way, as long as the end result's the same. Now, let me clarify. There are absolutely some things that need to be done a particular way. It's not just the owner's preference, it's the way it needs to be done. But there are a lot of times where it's more of a preference than a requirement. And CEOs are able to let go of that control of the how, as long as the end result is the same, can find a lot of freedom when they're able to let go of that.
Yeah, I agree. And that principle truly applies in any leadership role, not just within business, It's something we all could probably relate to some degree. But I think, if you've been in any kind of leadership role, you've felt that tension of, all right, that is not the way I would have done it, but the end result is exactly what it should be. And that's hard. And I mean, it does take a lot of humility, but I think the greatest leaders are the ones who learn that and they stick to it and their teams appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So, Steve, you mentioned the danger of becoming a bottleneck. It's inevitable. No one does it on purpose. But what are some signs that you think a CEO could look out for that might indicate that they have become their own bottleneck?
One is capacity. As a business grows, especially early on, when the CEO is at the center of all the activities, of all the decisions, a lot of times what happens is the business gets stuck and doesn't grow past a certain revenue number. Another thing to consider is, do things slow down whenever you, the owner, are out of the loop? Decisions that really could be delegated keep coming back to you. And sometimes this shows up in marketing when we're working with someone and the owner is the only one who really understands the brand, or maybe others understand it, but the owner wants to have the input. Everything needs to route through them. That can create some bottlenecks. And again, it goes back to stepping back, empowering other people, equipping them, letting them make decisions. Because otherwise what happens is the business is really just running through one brain, the owner. We all know there's a limit to what one person can handle and do because of time, emotional bandwidth, etc.
Steve, I used to have a boss a long time ago who used to always tell us we should always be training our replacements. And I know that's not exactly the same thing that we're talking about here, but I think a lot of times if we have that mentality, even if we have a very small team, like if you're bringing somebody in and you're not, and that's that humility piece again, like if you're willing to let somebody come into your process, see, all the flaws and all the great things too, but they learn how to do it your way. They learn from your mistakes. They watch you succeed and watch you fail. And I think that builds trust between you and somebody else who you do want to hand the baton to one day.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also interesting because, if I can build a bridge here, there are some similar patterns here in marketing. A lot of times people think that they have a marketing problem, but really that's not the problem. They don't have clarity. They're not clear on who they're trying to reach. They're not clear on what makes them different. They're not clear on the message that they want the market to hear. And until they solve that, no tactic is truly going to fix it.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we work with our clients on getting clarity. And especially in some of these spaces where the CEO is sort of the hub of all the activity, when these types of things, brand messaging, the marketing personas or the ICP, when that gets clearly defined, now others on the team are involved. They get to work from the same playbook, which could take some of the pressure off of the owner. And so when everybody has that clarity, and when that's communicated through the website, when it's communicated through the sales team, when it's communicated through the marketing activities and content, then everything downstream gets easier because things upstream are a lot clearer. And it's no longer just in the owner's brain, but it's now in a plan. It's now been communicated. So marketing can be executed much more efficiently.
Yes, that's a good word. And I think there's a lot of ways to avoid that one brain stuck scenario that we mentioned a minute ago. We live in a world full of, I just rewatched the Avengers movies with my kids over the Memorial Day break. And it's like we all have our own personal Jarvis now. We
We do.
train a brain to think like us and plan like us. And of course, the AI isn't perfect, but there's definitely ways to avoid that from happening if you want to invest in them. But okay, one last thing I want to touch on before we wrap this up, and it's that concept of collapse time. Chris framed it as one of his biggest lessons. How does that show up specifically in marketing decisions?
Well, I see it show up when business owners are spending months and months trying to figure out their marketing only through trial and error. They test things, they stop, they start over. Now, there's a place for that. But the problem is when that's happening without any kind of a plan, there's no strategy. And so it's what we would call hope wish marketing or spaghetti marketing, throw it against the wall, see what sticks. And the cost isn't just the money, it's the missed opportunities, leads that weren't generated, a missed momentum. And honestly, there's an emotional cost too. That can get wearying when you're trying different things. People get discouraged when they're not seeing results. And, Chris said it really well. The question isn't whether you can afford to get help, it's whether you can afford not to.
And if someone's listening and thinking, I actually don't know what's working in my marketing, what would be their first step?
What I would encourage them to do is go take the free marketing assessment on our website, wayfindmarketing.com. It's 25 yes, no questions, takes 5 minutes, and it immediately gives you a score with a clear breakdown of where things are going really well and where there are opportunities, where things are off track. And what it does is it gives an outside perspective based on a marketing framework that covers the full gamut of marketing. And it gives you a view of marketing that you don't necessarily get from the inside. And the other thing I would say is it's a free assessment, no strings attached. You're not going to get bombarded by emails or ads. And it provides some really good resources.
Yes. Thank you. So listener, go over to wayfindmarketing.com, take the assessment, poke around on our website. We have a learning center full of resources that can help you do marketing better. And if you are looking for a painter, if you're in the Mid-South, Memphis area, and you need residential or commercial painting, reach out to Chris and his team at Riggins Painting. You can find them online at rigginspainting.com.
Chris, thank you for being so honest about what these different stages look like, what they cost you, and what it took to move through them. This is absolutely the kind of conversation that I love having, and it makes this podcast useful and helpful for business owners and CEOs. So thank you for sharing that, Chris. Greatly appreciate that.
And if this one resonated with you, dear listener, please like, subscribe, and share it with a business owner in your world who might be ready to ask themselves the same hard question. We'll see you next time.